Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight in Austin. Paul Joseph Watson is joining us in the UK. And we're going to be going in just a moment to our reporters in Ferguson, Missouri. We have Joe Biggs and Jakari Jackson, who've been there all week awaiting the grand jury verdict. And there's been some action there last night. We're going to talk to them about that and what they see on the ground. Before we do, I want to let you know that this hour of the Alex Jones Show is brought to you by Silver Bullet. It's now back. We had run out of it. It's now in limited supply. Get it right now because it takes about 6 weeks to get more of it in. It's going to sell out pretty quickly. It's a difficult, long process to make this because we use a very high concentration. It's concentrated to 30 parts per million in a pure base of deionized water. So it's a very involved process involving high voltage electrical process that generates minute-sized particles. It's widely known that colloidal silver is a vital supplement for maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and now we have it at InfoWarsLife.com for a short period of time. It takes colloidal silver to get to the next level using a cutting-edge technique that is free of toxic artificial additives. There's never been a more important time, this time of year, especially with the flu season, cold season, many viruses circulating around. It's never been a more important time to have this powerful and clean form of colloidal silver. You can get it at InfoWarsLife.com, or you can call 888-253-3139. That's 888-253-3139. That's Silver Bullet. Now we're going to go to our reporters in Ferguson, but before we do, I wanted to just finish up. I cut off Bob in Texas real quick. He had just brought up something he wanted to talk about. Go ahead, Bob. You still on the line?
I am.
Yes, go ahead. What did you want to say about that?
You've heard about the Christmas truce. I don't know if everybody knows about that during World War I when the soldiers decided they were going to put down their arms and not kill each other anymore.
There's been some good movies made about that.
Those soldiers, the generals and stuff had to replace those soldiers because they wouldn't kill each other anymore. That's what we need to see, David, is more people on the inside who are serving this system to stand up and say no. It's just like all these pilots who are spraying us with all these chemtrails every day. They need to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yes.
That's what is most disappointing me, to see the people who continue to serve this evil.
That's right. And, you know, when you talk about that, and the reason I wanted to come back to you was because we just had the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it was soldiers at the border who refused to shoot people who wanted to cross. And who were the people that were showing up there? There were people who were coming from prayer meetings in churches where they had been meeting for 7 years in some cases, turning out by the tens of thousands, finally having enough. So, yeah, it's going to take a spiritual revival. It's going to take people who are the instruments of the oppressors to say, I'm not going to be their tool anymore, and stand up to them. Thank you so much for calling Bob in Texas. We need to move on to our reporters in Ferguson, Missouri. We've got Joe Biggs there on the ground. Joe, what have you guys been seeing the last couple of days? You filed a report last night about some small riots.
Joe Biggs, we are actually on South Florissant Avenue, right across from the police station and the fire department in Ferguson, Missouri. Yes, last night I got a call around 8:45 saying that there was a standoff between protesters and police officers here right between the police station and the fire department. There's a little barricade set up over there, and the police were standing behind there. By the time we got here, there were maybe 65 officers in, I would say, lower grade riot gear with just the shields, and some having face masks with a gas mask on their side. So 65 police officers to about 100 protesters that were here. Now, the interesting thing that happened last night, though, everybody was over off of the road on the other side where the grass is, and the police officers were behind the barricade. Well, they came around from the other side of the barricade and then started pushing the protesters into the road. Huh. Now, they were just told 30 minutes prior to that, if they get in the road, that would be considered unlawful and that the police would use force. The police came out and pushed us all into the road and then began arresting people in the street.
Hey, it sounds like what happened in the JFK 50th commemoration last year when they told everybody that was there in the crowd with Infowars, gave them access into an area and then sent the goons out to attack them.
Yeah, they pushed us out, and Jakari Jackson and I were walking backwards filming, and they're like, get out of here, get out of here. And I'm like, well, where do you want us to go? They're like, go to the road. Then as soon as we went to the road, the police ran out and just started snatching people up and then pushing them behind their line to where they would be arrested or whatever, released, soon So it was crazy. They pushed us into an area that was unlawful so they could just go out and arrest people. I've never seen that. That was just crazy.
It's just amazing. And, you know, that's one of the things that really concerns me about this. We have seen so many cases of police brutality. We were talking earlier in the program to Arnold Abbott, the 90-year-old veteran who's been feeding the homeless in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. And we're talking about the many ways that they have come against the homeless, you know, beating Kelly Thomas to death, shooting others in New Mexico and Michigan. And yet, in Ferguson, what they've done is they've not made it about the rules of engagement when it is allowed for the police to use lethal force or what level of force they should use. Instead, they have successfully taken over this thing and made it all about race, haven't they?
Yes, indeed. I mean, you hear a lot of talks, you know, on the social media, a lot of chatter about how blacks are calling for the deaths of whites, how whites are calling, you know, from the KKK for the deaths of blacks and things like that. They're trying to create this racial diversion to take away from the point that people originally came out here for. And it's getting so much, you know, global attention that it's causing these uprisings, you know, with protests all over. And now they're expecting that when the grand jury decision comes out, if the officer isn't charged, that there will be protests, you know, in New York, Chicago, Detroit, LA. You know, I heard an activist saying that what they're planning in LA is going to be 10 times worse than anything that anybody's ever seen. You know, and I can't say that it's just a lot of the bad police around here. Last night, I heard some very awful things from some of the protesters as well. One of the guys walked up to a police officer and said, "Hey," he's like, "I know that you have a daughter," and he said he was going to sodomize her. You know, that doesn't help the problem whatsoever. You know, when you're out here and it's 65 to 100, and so far it's pretty calm and quiet, you know, and then you go out and you're doing that, you're provoking. I mean, what kind of action, what kind of response do you expect to happen from the police officers when you're Joe, threatening their daughters?
Yeah, they use agent provocateurs on both sides of the fence, don't they? And, of course, what the police did last night was very provocative. Tonight on the nightly news, Darren McBreen is going to be interviewing Larry Pinckney. Of course, he was with the the original Black Panthers. And as he's pointed out many times in interviews with us, when they came against them was when they started uniting the entire community, when they were no longer just focused on black people, but they were uniting everybody in the community. That's when they got really dangerous. And the interesting thing, and it's going to be on the nightly news tonight, he got his FBI file. And in the FBI file, they talked about him being dangerous because he could appeal to both blacks and whites. That's the issue. If they can divide us by ethnicity, then they win. It's only when we can get them, when we can come after them and say, you're not going to have these kinds of rules of engagement. We need to have accountability with the police, and this is something that affects everybody, not just one ethnic group. I understand that black people have seen this far more than anybody else, and I think they understand that more than anybody else. The problem is that because of that, they're easily manipulated by the powers that be into thinking that this is simply a race war, and it is not.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's about police officers, you know, going out and doing these no-knock warrants, going out and killing young Americans of all races, you know, going in and throwing flashbangs and ripping a child's chest open and going to the wrong place. You know, anytime we have a war on drugs or a war on terrorism, all we do is make it worse. You know, this is like a war on race, and they're making it 10 times worse.
Yes. And I understand that in the war on drugs, the brunt of that has been borne by the poor people, by the inner city people, by the black people. The majority of them go to jail for marijuana when oftentimes you don't see that same kind of incarceration rate with white people. So I understand they've borne the brunt of that disproportionately, but this is something that is destroying the legal framework of the entire country for everyone. It's putting everyone in danger when we allow the government to assume these kind of authoritarian powers that we've allowed under the war on drugs, that we're allowing under terrorism. And now we're seeing these rules of engagement that the federal government is training local police departments to engage in. We see that there's no longer a restraint on the use of force. I've got Paul Joseph Watson on the line here, and I wanted to see if, Paul, do you have any questions for Joe that you wanted to ask him about what's going on in Ferguson?
Yeah, well, basically, obviously, we're expecting the grand jury to come to a decision tomorrow. That's not going to be announced until Sunday at the earliest, if they do come to that decision. So I just wanted to ask Joe, we've got these reports about militant groups going after Officer Darren Wilson directly. We've got lists of targets, which include power substations, water treatment facilities. Joe, from being on the ground there back in August compared to now, do you expect there to be a similar level of violence in reaction to this expected acquittal, or do you think it's more likely to be more subdued this time?
Well, from the reaction of the police officers that I saw last night, they were, I would say, a little bit more well trained in how they did act and how they did approach people instead of just sporadically running out and like attacking the crowd like they did back in August. So I think there's going to be a different way that the police handle. But, back in Halloween this year, they called him a vandal, and the local Fox News actually shut down a power area, and it shut down the power to the fire department and the police station here. So it seems like that was almost like a training exercise for something bigger to come. I don't think it's too far-fetched that a militant group could shut down the Emerson Electric Company, which is just right up the road a couple miles. So I expect things to be bad, but I don't know if they will be as bad as in August. And when I say that, I mean that in the amount of people coming out, because if you guys remember back in August, at one point there was like 3,000 people out in the streets. I don't think it's going to be like that because it was unorganized. This time you have more well-organized protest groups, whatever you want to call them, militants who have been organizing the past few months, preparing, coming up with game plans on their action if the verdict comes down that Darren Wilson will not be charged. So I think you have more coordinated attacks, so to say, that could happen, and that's something that we're going to have to be watchful for in the near future.
As we look at this, I want you guys to give me your thoughts on the timing of this, because, of course, this is likely to happen tomorrow. I know that it's a jury, but it is, in fact, a grand jury. Grand juries are known for being rubber stamps of the government or the prosecution. So the timing of this coming out right after Obama makes his pronouncement, do you think that there's some collusion there to try to wash out the story of Obama's amnesty, to wash that out of the headlines?
Yeah, they're going to use the Obama's amnesty plan. They're going to use Ferguson as a burqa to cover up the amnesty plan that's going to go on here.
I think so. What do you think, Paul? You think this is deliberate timing?
Yeah, I mean, I made that point. There's actually a headline out of the Washington Times: "Will Ferguson race riots help Obama?" So, Rahm Emanuel never let a good crisis go to waste. If they can use this as a distraction from the fury over executive amnesty, then they will do so. And, Obama came out quite visibly early on and offered his condolences to Michael Brown's family. That caused resentment amongst Officer Darren Wilson supporters, who said that he should also at least give some words for his plight. He's obviously now being targeted with death threats. So from the administration itself, they've come down on one side. We know that Obama met with some of the Ferguson protesters. So the administration is using this to cause more division amidst an already divisive environment with this amnesty program. So that's definitely in the offing to exploit this crisis as a distraction from the amnesty program.
I remember when this...
And they had Al Sharpton there as well, too. Don't forget the great race baiter.
Oh, yeah. I remember when this story first broke. It was on the weekend. I think I was doing the radio show, and it looked initially like another one of these cases of unjustified use of force, of over-the-top use of force, and they allowed that narrative to sit there for a long time before they came out and showed any evidence that would have exonerated the police officer there. They engaged in character assassination openly, talking about that before they showed any evidence that would justify the officer's shooting. So it seems to me that if they had that evidence, and they certainly certainly would have had that evidence if it wasn't, in fact, manufactured, if it is true.
There's something interesting that happened last night, too, that I almost forgot to say. Last night, there were, I think, 5 live streamers in the area, 4 local that live here in Ferguson in the area, and then myself. As the police advanced on us, there were a lot of people in the Twitterverse, on Facebook, that had all of the live streams up at once. Now, the interesting thing that happened last night, right as the police advanced on the road and started throwing people to the ground and arresting them, all of us lost our live feed. All of us had our phones shut down. we weren't able to transmit anymore for quite some time, and then it took a few minutes to get it back up as well. So I thought that was weird. That was coordinated. All of the live streamers, because all the people, I've been getting tweets all day and into last night saying that, hey, we were watching all 5 of them at the same time, and all of you went out at the exact same time, right as the police came into the street and started arresting people.
Clearly a case of them using selective shutdown of an area. And we saw that at the Bundy Ranch as well. When I was out there with Josh, all through the week, we couldn't get any reception whatsoever. We had to go get Wi-Fi at the Bundy Ranch to upload our reports, to do our interviews. We couldn't get anything at the protest site. And then magically, what's that?
So I'm glad you brought that up. There was a young lady here last night, and she was really mad about the fact that she's like, why aren't Americans standing up for our cause just like they did at the Bundy Ranch? She said men and women came from all over the U.S. and went to that ranch armed and stood up against those police officers, against the BLM. Why aren't they coming here and supporting us as well? She says it's the same thing. It's brutality. It's big government trying to come and take over and push you around, strip you of your liberties. And she was wondering why people aren't coming here to help support them as well in their cause against militarized police in Ferguson.
Well, that's an interesting point. I was going to say that, you know, on the day that the government had orchestrated saying that they were going to remove the regulations for the Bundy family, on that day, they turned everything on. We could get cell reception everywhere, and then they selectively turned it back off. But it is a good point. I think that it is something, when we were at the Bundy Ranch, people were saying, oh, you're not going to show up and cover it when something happens in the inner city. And it's like, well, we've been doing that all along. We heard the same thing there at the Bundy Ranch, that people wouldn't show up. I think people are showing up. I don't know if it's the same people that were there at the Bundy Ranch that are showing up in Ferguson, but there are people who are concerned about it, who do see that this is a problem that is not simply a racial divide and conquer problem. But I think a lot of people have bought into that, even people who might otherwise stand up for what has happened there in terms of the rules of engagement. Paul, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, well, just on the telecommunications thing, the shutdown, we know, I think it was Apple had a patent where they could shut down people's cameras on their phones during a concert where they didn't want copyrighted footage to be videotaped. So we know, at least in an embryonic stage, that technology is circulating out there.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight in Austin. We have Paul Joseph Watson with us in the UK, and we're going to be joined in just a moment with Jakari Jackson in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, as we were talking to Joe Biggs, who is also in Ferguson, Missouri, he was talking about how everybody at the small small riot that they had last night, everybody that was live streaming lost their feeds at exactly the same time. In other words, they could have easily have shut down a cell phone area there. But Paul had mentioned that, of course, Apple has been granted a patent to disable everything on your phone so that you would not even be able to take footage that you could later upload. And, of course, we don't know if they've implemented that yet or not. This is a story that was written by his brother, Steve Watson, going back to September 3rd, 2012. But, of course, we just learned today from the Washington Post that the next step in cell phone tracking is going to be determining your altitude. They're not content to just know where you are on an XY grid, to know your coordinates that way. They want to know what floor you're on. Yes, this is something new that is a capability, they say, of the iPhone 6 from Apple and some of the new Android devices. They're going to use the new barometric pressure sensors. And this is a rule that's being driven by the FCC. They say, well, we need to have it for 911 calls so we'll know what floor the person is on. Really? Is that what you're going to use it for? We know what you're going to use it for. They also go into this and say, well, it's got some legitimate uses. Malls could use altitude tracking to monitor crowd flows and send coupons to the phones of customers walking past a shoe shop on the top floor. Or multi-level casinos could monitor gamblers for security purposes. Or companies could keep better tabs on the movements of their employees. In other words, we are their inventory. We're their cattle. They want to watch us wherever we go so that they always know that they can push something on us or grab us at a moment's notice. And just one more thing, and I'll go back to Jakari and Ferguson. They just had a case in Baltimore where someone was arrested because they got his cell phone location. The judge wanted to know how they got that, and they refused to tell the judge. They said, no, we have a non-disclosure agreement. He goes, you don't have a non-disclosure agreement with me. Give me the information, or I'm going to hold you in contempt of court. And they said, well, forget it then. and we'll let the guy go free. See, that's their priority. Their priority is not to protect you. Their priority is to protect their surveillance measures and to defend the corporations that essentially run this government with their non-disclosure agreements. Let's go to Jakari Jackson in Ferguson. Jakari.
Jakari Jackson reporting Ferguson, Missouri. We are in front of the police station where you guys saw the video last night where the police officers push people into the streets. Now, I will say this time around, besides in them shoving everybody out into the streets, the officers last night were better behaved than what we saw back in August. No tear gas, no rubber bullets, nothing like that. So we've seen this is the second protest we were at last night since we've been here. It's getting warmer temperatures, so people are coming out longer. I think the first one we went to only lasted about 20 or 30 minutes because it was about 17 degrees at the time. Now it's up to about 50, so the protests are lasting a little bit longer. The thing that they seem to be doing this time around is blocking off the streets, because when we were originally here back in August, the police had a lot of the streets blocked off and then blamed the protesters for it. But now the protesters are coming out and purposely blocking the streets peacefully, but they are blocking the streets, and the police come out there and try to remove them the best they can. And I wasn't live streaming at the time Joe lost his signal, but many of the people in the crowd were saying that, yes, in fact, they all simultaneously lost their live stream. Luckily, I was filming on our camera, so I had.
Thanks, Jakari. We're going to take a break now. We're going to come back. If you're on the phone, wanted to talk to us, hang on. I'm going to try to take as many calls as I can in overdrive. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Overdrive of the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here in Austin. I wanted to get to some of the callers that got on the line a little bit earlier, and we ran out of time to talk to them in that segment. I want to try to get through as many people as I can. I've got Bill in Texas, Barbara in Illinois, John in California, Bill in Pennsylvania, Stephen in Florida, and so on. We'll try to get through as many of these as we can. Let's go quickly. Bill in Texas. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Hey, I'm a truck driver. I used to live in St. Louis, Missouri, and the problem is that there was a bunch of M44. I go make my deliveries, and I got video of it. I mean, there was a convoy of trucks, and I mean trucks all over the place. And I turned around and and then I saw troop carriers with reservists in there going up West Florence. I just went through St. Louis.
Wow. So they're loaded for bear. They're really mobilizing, and it looks like this could be a real powder keg. That's interesting. Well, we're going to have our reporters there. They're going to be giving us live feed on it. Thank you, Bill in Texas. Barbara in Illinois. Go ahead. Barbara, you still there?
All of my life, as long as I've been able to understand, I believe that the president could issue an executive order to restore law and order in our country.
Yeah. He's issued an executive order about just about everything except that, hasn't he?
And I'm 92 years old now.
Yeah.
And I don't like what's happening.
No.
Somebody's got to do something.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I wish they would. And like I pointed out before, they keep saying, well, our hands are tied. We can't do anything. There's no point in even trying to come up with impeachment or to come after them for criminal operations when they target people using the IRS as a political weapon or because of Benghazi. They won't do any criminal investigations. They won't impeach anybody. They won't do anything except use it for their own political advantage. And we can see that in the fact that they have brought up Keystone Pipeline legislation 9 times, knowing they can't get that passed, but they won't do anything to try to rein in Obama. Thank you so much, Barbara. Let's move along so we can try to get everybody on here. John in California. Go ahead, John.
David, you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Go ahead. You're on.
Okay, great. I didn't hear the scratch. All right. You're doing a great job, David, by the way.
Thank you.
Maybe you should switch with Alex and you take the daily broadcast and he take the nightly news. But anyway, getting to the point, I want to follow up with what that woman just said.
Mm-hmm.
The political option is off the table. We tried in 2008. We tried in 2012. So now we got to go from the ballot box to the military solution. All military officers that can hear my voice that work in or near the Pentagon must immediately implement the U.S. version of Operation Valkyrie. We don't know what the code name of the actual U.S. operation is, but you must do it.
I understand. I still think that there's some options if we can get honest people in at the lower levels of government. We've seen changes made in terms of ballot issues passed. We have some areas where we've got sheriffs who will stand up. I don't think we're going to get any political solutions out of Washington. I agree with that. I don't think we're going to find anybody running for president. I don't think we're going to find any congressmen. We do have some honest congressmen, but they're not the ones who are in charge there. I think it's going to have to be stopped by our governors at the state area, and it's going to have to be stopped by people who are sheriffs. And we need to see the people who have legitimate authority, and they do have legitimate authority, using their authority. One of the ways that we can do it is to use our authority and vote as jurors, to stand up against unjustified laws and defend each other in juries. We're not even doing that. So until we can see somebody stand up and do that, I think it's going to be very difficult to take a bullet box option on that. Well, we ran out of time. I've got a couple more callers on here. Sorry we couldn't get to you, but we'll be back tomorrow, 11 Central, noon Eastern, on The Alex Jones Show. Join us then.
Introducing the first proprietary oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, OxyPowder. Backed by real FDA-approved phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. People are suffering from all kinds of digestive issues these days. All the toxins from the air, the food, the water, ultimately ends up in the gut or affects the gut. My main focus was to come up with a remedy for this, something that's safe and effective that anyone can take on a regular basis to keep their intestinal lining clean. My recommendation is to clean your intestines at least 2 to 3 times a week to prevent the toxic buildup from going into your bloodstream. Take your health into your own hands and start cleansing your body today with OxyPowder. Secure your OxyPowder today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com.